Hey everybody. So this is going to be a quick video, hopefully quick, on how to solve equations involving one absolute value term. So just when the absolute value appears one time in the equation. All right. So here's the equation. The absolute value of 9x plus 1/4 minus 1 equals 5. So here are the steps that you'll take. First of all, you will want to isolate the absolute value expression. So move everything else to the other side of the equation so that one side of the equation just is the absolute value expression. So to do that, for this example, I'll just add 1 to both sides. So 9x plus 1/4 equals 6. And this is a smart thing to do just to make sure that you're not running into any trouble. What's the trouble that you can run into with absolute value equations? Well, remember, absolute value is defined as a number's distance from 0. And distances are always positive. So it is possible, and this is a little trap that a lot of textbooks like to throw at people, is to have some absolute value term set equal to a negative number. And whenever you run into that, immediately you can just stop right there and you can say there are no solutions, because it's the same thing as like the square root, where the square root always outputs a positive number. So solving something like the square root of x equals -5, there are no solutions. There is no x that satisfies that. It's the same thing here. If you have absolute value is equal to something negative, then it's a problem. So in this case, we're all good to go. That's kind of why you want to isolate the absolute value, is to make sure its absolute value equals something positive so that it is actually solvable. So yeah, this one is solvable. In a second, we'll look at one that's what it looks like when it's not solvable and what happens if you don't sort of pay attention to that. Okay, so we've got absolute value is equal to something positive. Absolute value, when you're solving absolute value equations or inequalities, they break up. Once you have something like this where its absolute value equals whatever else, it breaks into two different equations. So it breaks into, and in particular, the two equations are taking whatever is inside of the absolute values, like basically just removing the absolute value signs, taking whatever is inside the absolute value, set it equal to the other side, and then taking the negative of whatever is inside the absolute value and setting it equal. So the first equation that we'll have to solve is just taking what's inside of the absolute value. 9x plus 1/4 equals 6. That's the first equation that we'll have to solve. The second equation that we'll have to solve is negative 9x plus 1/4, quantity. This whole thing is negative, so taking what's inside of the absolute value and just making the whole thing negative. Okay, so now we'll just go through, I'll solve the left one first. So subtracting 1/4 from each side is 9x equals, well, it would be what? 5 3/4, so 23/4. 23/4, yeah, because 6 would be 24/4 minus 1, 23/4. So 9x equals 23/4, divide through by 9, x is equal to 23/36. Cool. Now we'll solve the second equation. So divide through by -1, and you might be thinking, wait, why don't we just at the outset write it this way? Take whatever is inside of the absolute value and set it equal to whatever's on the other side, but make that negative, because that's what this step is. And yeah, you can do that when it's equations. You might run into some issues when it's inequalities, because going from, if this was an inequality rather than equality, then this step right here, dividing through by a negative, will flip this sign. So just kind of keep that in mind. Maybe I'll make another video that is solving absolute value inequalities. So in any case, we divide through by the negative, so 9x plus 1/4 equals -1/6. Now 9x is going to equal, let's see, so -6 minus 1/4 is -24/4 minus 1/4, so -25/4. And then again, divide through by 9, x is -25/36. And these are the two solutions, both of these. They're both solutions. Right there. Okay. All right, so let's look at a problem, an equation where things can go a little bit funky. Let's see, we'll keep it nice and simple. We'll do something like x plus 1 plus 5 equals 3. And so the reason that I'm bringing this up is because I was sort of saying at the outset, one, you want to, like, before you jump into this business of splitting the absolute value into two different equations, you want to solve for just the absolute value term first. So on this one, what you can see, if we solve for the absolute value term first, we get x plus 1 equals 3 minus 5 is negative 2. And once you get to this step right here, that's where, like, if you see this absolute value equals something negative, you're already done. You don't need to solve any further, because all that you have to say is there are no solutions. It's not positive for the absolute value to produce something that is less than 0. It's just not positive. So just right here, you can just say, okay, yep, no solutions. Boom, done. Hopefully save yourself some time on the homework or the exam, whatever it is. But suppose that you didn't think about this. Suppose you didn't do this step, and you just decided to take this absolute value term without subtracting 5, and you just solve it. What happens? Well, we would end up with the two equations would be x plus 1 plus 5 equals 3, and then the other one would be negative x plus 1 plus 5 equals 3. And when we solve these out, let's see, 1 plus 5 is 6, 3 minus 6x equals negative 3. Over here, what would we get? Let's see, so if we subtract 5 from both sides, this side would become negative 2. Then dividing through by a negative, we get x plus 1 equals positive 2, right? Yeah. Then subtracting 1, we get x equals 1. Okay, so we found some solutions. But I claimed a second ago there are no solutions. So let's see what happens if we check our solutions. So when x equals negative 3, what do we get? We would have negative 3 plus 1, the absolute value of that, plus 5, and we're checking, does that come out to 3? Well, negative 3 plus 1 is negative 2. The absolute value of negative 2 is positive 2. 2 plus 5 does not equal 3. 2 plus 5 is 7. Okay. Well, what about x equals 1? Let's try that one. What happens? So if x equals 1, we get 1 plus 1, the absolute value of that, plus 5. And again, we're asking, does that equal 3? Well, 1 plus 1 is 2. The absolute value of 2 is just 2, so this becomes 2 plus 5, which is 7. Does not equal 3. Okay? So this is kind of the reason why you might want to do this step first, of sort of solving for the absolute value piece first. Yeah, just really quick, because I can see this sort of question coming up for some people. What if we had something that was like 2 times the absolute value of, and I'm just going to keep it simple. I'm not actually going to solve this thing out. What if you have something like that where there's some number that's being multiplied by the absolute value? Same thing. Just isolate the absolute value, divide by 2. So this becomes x plus 1 equals 7 halves. The absolute value of x plus 1 equals 7 halves. And then, yeah, just go through and solve this thing like normal. Okie dokie. That's everything for this video for solving equations that involve just one absolute value. If you've got any questions, let me know. I'll be happy to answer them.